Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to Cloud Wars Live, where we're exploring today's digital revolution, how it's changing every facet of our lives, and especially the wild things that have been happening over the last few months that have turned so many parts of the world upside down, how we live, how we learn, how we work, how we communicate, and I think a lot about how we think about the future, where we're headed, what's going on. What are things going to be like for our kids, our grandkids, ourselves, our jobs, and so on. And somebody always with a great deal of insight, good ideas on this is one of our monthly regular guests, Tony Uphoff, who's the CEO of Thomas. Tony, welcome back. Always great to have you.
Hey, thanks, Bob. It's always a blast to be on the program.
And folks, as you know, Tony's the CEO of Thomas. He's been a CEO of multiple companies in the tech space, the media business. He's been a blogger, a deep thinker about a lot of different things going on here today. Tony has understood the technology business for a long time, and now he's done his own digital transformation at Thomas, a 120-year-old formerly sort of trade media company that Tony has flipped over into an internet and data services company. So Tony, you CEO sitting here at a company now, you've sort of gone through this big overhaul and you say, okay, now we're ready to go into the new thing. And then this new thing happened.
Yeah. It is an amazing experience, right? So, having the incredible honor to run a 122-year-old company that had already started on the journey of really investing in technology through the years and helping to accelerate that transition into much more of a platform business model and creating a data business. And, as Thomas serves as the ultimate marketplace for buyer and seller of sourcing of industrial products and services, it gives us this just ridiculous window into the industrial economy. So it's just been a blast to be a part of it. I think what's fascinating in the conversations you and I have had over the last several months, obviously, is a lot of the investments that we made on behalf of the company in terms of advanced technology, both in the way we run the company and the enabling technologies we use to run the company, the technology we use to serve our users, and then also the technology with which we serve up the advertising and the revenue sides of our business. As we did that, what we didn't realize we were starting to do was to create an environment that gave us almost infinite flexibility. So, you somewhat take for granted today, and I hope we never do, the cloud technology, the mobile technology, the remarkable access to infrastructure and software tools that enabled us to have a business that when the pandemic broke out, we were able to pivot to fully remote operations. And I emphasize operations, not just remote work, but remote operations, including payroll, billing, quote unquote back office functions. It was really amazing. And I think to your point, if I look at the scope of history that our company's been around, I don't think as we were building that, anybody would have said, hey, you know what? This would actually set us up to work completely remote operations. I don't ever remember having that conversation. I do remember having the conversation that we wanted to have more agility and flexibility in our structure so that we could hire talent where talent was versus insisting that in our case, it'd be within proximity of downtown Manhattan, New York. But boy, Bob, what a remarkable time. And I think as you and I have talked, this, I'll use the term pivot to the remote work, something we thought that was temporary is now opening up whole new perspectives to us about what's in the range of the possible about what we could do with the structures of our business and how far we could take that. And so like a lot of companies, we're spending a lot of time looking at the enabling technologies we're using, how we're using them, but also what comes next now. What is it that we want to do, as opposed to, I think initially, Bob, when we did this, we were thinking, well, this is going to be 2 or 3 months and then we're all going to go back into the office, and and everything will be, everything will return to normal. And I don't even bother to use the new normal term anymore. I just think we're stepping into a completely different way of thinking about our businesses and running our businesses.
Yeah, definitely, Tony. It's been something. And I know that in the notes that you had sent over, one of the interesting points I think you brought up was I find it interesting sometimes. You'll hear anything, it seems to me, involving economists to say, and economists expressed surprise that, this went up. Economists were surprised that this went down. I went, well, maybe you ought to go find some new people to check in with, because they're always seem not to get it so good. But you said there were, you're puzzled sometimes at how people are like shocked that remote worker productivity, as if, one negates the other.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? And so I question this inside of our own company. But like you, I participate in a lot of peer review type relationships where I can compare notes with other folks running companies and things like that. And then I guess, like everybody, I'm influenced by the general business media and what some of the writing and things like that. But it seems like you're hearing this repetitive conversation of business leaders surprised at the level of productivity that they're able to generate remotely. And I'm not saying this, look, I live in a glass house too. I think to a certain extent, I have felt some of the same thing. But on reflection, I've really encouraged our company to look at this from a consciously competent point of view of, we shouldn't be the slightest bit surprised. We didn't do these things so that we could be 100% remote. But we also shouldn't be surprised that remote work can be as productive, in some cases, more productive. And, Bob, if you think about it, you and I briefly got into this conversation, kind of a related conversation, is I think there's a story to be written on the myth of the open office, right? And it somewhat fits into what you and I are talking about here. That was an idea that was cooked up for increased efficiency, which means jamming more people into the same footprint and hoping that they're productive. There was literally not a shred of evidence that kind of a model made people more productive. Clearly, it made the business more efficient because you could take 300 people and put them in a single footprint, whereas before that would have taken you 2 or 3 floors or something like that. But I think there's growing evidence that there was a downside to productivity based on a purely open, everybody's sitting at benches and that kind of stuff. And I think what's really kind of interesting about the era we're living through, Bob, is, in a way, don't we kind of have the best of both worlds, right? It's starting to emerge where people can have whatever sort of an office they want. They can have the flexibility of quiet, private office in their home. At the same point in time, it's going to enable a lot of companies to get out from under the fixed cost or sunk cost in real estate that, frankly, is not particularly leverageable for a company. Other than as a place to get together, it doesn't really provide, it's not like an asset on a balance sheet that you go, whoa, look how many square feet this company has. Whoa, let's buy this stock. These guys are killing it, right? It's just sort of one of these fixed cost items that oftentimes we don't stop to really pay attention to unless a lease is up. And I think we've been given this gift, I hate to call it that, of really rethinking how work can be done today. And I know at our company, as well as a lot of companies I talk to, it's really liberated a lot of thinking, Bob. And it's gotten people past the, wow, who would have thunk it? We're productive working remotely. And now people starting to think far more deeply about not just the future of work, but what is the future of that, whether you want to call it remote first, office second kind of model. What does that really look like? And then there's some other tributaries that flow off of that start to raise some questions or some complexities in the way you want to run a model like that.
Yeah, Tony, I along those lines, I heard a great line the other day. Bill McDermott, the CEO of ServiceNow, had done an interview with John Ford. It was, about the future of work. They talked about a lot of interesting things. And at one point, Bill McDermott referred to the office as a productivity tool. He said there will be times when, he said, there'll be some people who would choose to be, work almost exclusively remotely. But he said, say you've got issues with childcare, you've got issues with parents, you've got other things going on in your home. You need to use the office as a productivity tool. There's, some companies that are saying we're going to ease people into it over quite a long period of time. They're doing weekly surveys, and they're saying, look, we might open this up to 10% of the people, and we'll do a pool to give everybody a chance to see what goes on there. But I thought it was a very interesting application of a relatively familiar term, productivity tools, with something that I don't think most people would ever think of a productivity tool as your office. No, it's like the place where you go to access productivity. So we're really scrambling these
Yeah.
ideas about what we have, what we are, these things we've looked at for so long in a similar way. And it does turn them upside down. It turns the notion, as you said, it unleashes some creativity about what's possible, what isn't possible, and why do we erect these boundaries around us when there's really no reason to?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I was sharing with you a few minutes before we went on air. We've made the decision, rather than each month say, well, we thought it was August 1st, now it's going to be September 1st. We've just simply said, hey, it'll be January 21 or sooner before we reopen our New York City offices. But what we are doing in the interim is, where we had multiple floors, we're going down to a single floor, doing some subtle reconfiguring, and we're evaluating systems where you can reserve, so that at no point in time would you have every employee of the company there. We wouldn't be able to do that. But that I really like the way McDermott says that. That's an interesting way to think about it for those people that either there is an appropriately structured group meeting, or for them, the office is going to work better from a productivity point of view. We want to create the environment where we can do that. Also, we want to create an environment where on occasion we can have group gatherings, and obviously they need to be spaced appropriately for the foreseeable future. But that level of flexibility for us, and I will tell you about, it's a funny thing. You talk about how a crisis can sometimes really change your perspective. I think this is kind of this interesting creative phase for our company, where I think it's really unleashed a lot of folks to start to think differently about things that I know it sounds absurd to say, well, Kish, if you work remotely as opposed to an office, do you look at the business differently? But I think it has kind of liberated people's creativity a bit to start to say, hey, well, why have we done it that way? Could we look at it differently? Could we think about this differently? Could we apply technology? That's the other thing I think that's really accelerated at our company. We've always been pretty good with technology. I think we're getting better because more and more people are looking at ways that we can now apply technology to our business, as opposed to, something that you might draft up in an office that your first thought is, well, we got all these people sitting around, I guess I got to put people against this, right? So it's a fascinating area. And I think, years from now, these will be case studies, right, in some business school about the impact that this had on business.
Yeah, yeah. And those things, in traditional offices, conference rooms always get booked up early. So who can game the conference room system and all. And we just sort of tracked it that, well, that's how it is. That's an immutable law of physics, right? You can't change that. But I think there's going to be so many interesting things that come out of this. And Tony, when you were describing that, the creativity that's been unlocked, it's like why do we do it this way? Working remotely forces you to do some things or discover some things that you would not have otherwise,
Right.
and learn some new stuff. I'm probably one of the most pathetically incompetent computer users, ever to walk the earth. But somehow, working on my own the last 3.5 years, I have no idea how. And I've got this fairly common thing, MacBook Air. But I've learned how to do some stuff, and it always sort of amazes me in some ways that I've been able to figure something like that out, even though it's very simple. But what it's allowed me to do then is things that I wasn't able to do before.
Yeah.
So organizationally, and it's
Yeah.
almost like these groups in organizations or companies that in the office, they kind of sit right next to each other, but they never talk. But you break things up, you have to understand a little more what goes on the other side of those walls or partitions. So as you said before, it's a gift. We can't change what happened. We don't like it perhaps, but this is reality. And I think leaders like you are pushing this notion of new ways of leading, new ways of looking at what we have here, new ways of saying, hey, this is the environment we have. How do we optimize this?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Bob, to your point, it's interesting in your example, boy, can I relate to that, right? You and I grew up in and around technology circles, and our expertise was understanding the implications of technology in the technology market. We weren't technologists, as in engineers or developers or products or services. And even with that, we gleaned a bit of technical knowledge. I would say in the last 4 months, my technical abilities have gone up quite a bit. Now, they're probably still rudimentary compared to others, but an example would be really another level of unified communications use, as simple as what we're doing right now, understanding the tools, being able to broadcast, being able to video, being able to do these things where in an office, I'm very fortunate. I can rely on people. We have a little studio and all that kind of stuff. Having to literally figure out, it's got to go this week. I've got to figure this out from my apartment. And, nobody's going to do this for me has actually been really good for me. I've had a few moments of, oh, I can't believe I'm doing this. But all kidding aside, I think that's been, for me at least, and I think for so many people at our company, it's been, kind of like a discovery when you start working out and you kind of realize how much you actually can do after you start doing this a little bit. It becomes a daily practice of kind of learning something new every day. I think it's just been a really, and I want to be very clear to the listeners, I'm not trying to make light of what people are dealing with. I'm not trying to make light or say, hey, good news, a crisis. I'm not giving that pitch, but I do think leaders need to look at some of the positive forcing functions that the pandemic is creating, and where they can, embrace them. Don't fight them because you're just going to swim upstream. Embrace them and make, on Wall Street, they use the term, make the trend your friend. Mm-hmm. And I think, to a great extent, that's a great opportunity for leaders right now, especially in companies where there's been at least a reasonable investment in technology. If you've got a massive amount of technical debt, you're probably in a world of hurt right now. Yeah. And that's a different set of skills and practices that you need to do. But if you're stayed reasonably current in your systems, in your process, you've moved applications into the cloud, all the types of things that we so often talk about on your program, Bob, I think this is a time where this is really a time of innovation.
So, Tony, along those lines, what would you say happens to, an age-old management term, I guess, management by walking around? How do you do the management by walking around thing in an online virtual world?
Man, isn't that the right question, Bob? Tom Peters coined that in the search of excellence. What that dates back to the probably late 80s, early 90s, I'm going to say, when that book came out. And he and his researchers defined that one of the attributes of really excellent companies was that leaders, and particularly very senior leaders, had a technique of management by wandering around. And if you kind of go through history, it's not an absolute, but there's a common thread there. And I certainly was raised, and so were you, in environments where you were encouraged to engage that way. And that's how you learned. It's how you demonstrated. It's how you coached. It's how you did a lot of things. It is really hard. And I think that's probably the thing that I find that I miss the most. And what I challenge in myself, I'm missing the social engagement of managing by walking around. Or am I actually missing something in terms of my ability to coach or guide, or more importantly, just understand what's going on? A lot of management by wandering around is just to make sure you understand what the heck is going on a daily basis, right? It's kind of a twofold thing there. And I don't have an easy answer to it. I have found that the standing meetings that are a normal part of your life transfer very easily into this kind of an environment. That's not very difficult to do, and we've all experienced that. As the millennials in our company use the term, rolling up on somebody unannounced in the office is harder to do. But I'll tell you something, Bob, what we've found, and it's actually worked pretty well. Everybody's got scheduled meetings. You can see everybody's schedule. But in addition to Ring Central that leverages Zoom video technology, we're also big users of Slack. Slack has a video feature to it, and you can do a quick video Slack call. What we're finding is that, not in the beginning, but over time, now in month 4, there's a fair amount of impromptu ping, you accept or you don't accept, And I just check in, hey, Bob, what's happening? What's going on? And there are these, what we're discovering as we look at the data, they tend to be very brief conversations. They could be as short as 5 minutes, long would be 15 minutes. They're not scheduled, and they tend to be kind of that version of almost managing by walking around, if that makes sense. So I think two answers to your question. I don't think there's an easy replication of it, pardon me. But I do think perhaps, if you're using management by walk around to monitor people, that was probably not a great use of your time anyways. And there's other ways you could probably figure out to be more productive. So if it's really a way to kind of engage, encourage somebody, motivate somebody, coach somebody, make sure you're aware, you want to clarify, hey, I want to make sure I understood what happened in this customer interaction or whatever the heck that it might be. Those impromptu reach outs, we're finding, and again, this too could pass because, so you can't force somebody to answer a video call that doesn't feel like answering a video call, obviously. But that has been maybe one little small way. But boy, I'm hoping some of your listeners have other creative ways to, I don't want to say replicate that, because I think that's a little like the trade show to virtual event failure. I don't think we're trying to replicate it, but what is it, right, that we could discover that provides a similar benefit, right, to that idea of the engagement of management by walking around?
Yeah. Well, Tony, I've got a question and a comment about that I want to get to in 1 second. But first, just a quick word from our sponsor, BMC. In a world that's changing faster than ever before, the biggest challenge for businesses is creating fabulous customer experiences. That objective requires actionable insights and real-time agility from one end of your business to the other. At BMC, they call this the autonomous digital enterprise, and they've put together a set of solutions to help you anticipate what's coming, adjust accordingly, and acknowledge those changes from end to end. To start your journey to the autonomous digital enterprise, visit bmc.com/ADE. So, Tony, about that thing, the management by walking around, the question I had is, so are these, impromptu Slack calls, if I ping you, am I rolling up on you videoistically?
You are.
Okay.
So,
all right.
So this will make you even more popular with your daughters if you express the term appropriately. And I'm probably butchering millennial speak here, by the way, but
well, you're supposed to.
Yeah, exactly. We should be at this stage, right? I think it is a really interesting dynamic, and I think the flip side of management by walking around is that was an effective management technique nearly 20 plus years ago, and if you think about how the world has changed since then, the amount of data that a company was able to produce in real time back then was probably close to zero. You had monthly, if not quarterly data and review. You had teams of people producing, analysis and all this kind of stuff that the senior execs would look at. So I also think that, not to suggest that it completely goes away, but I think if you're not developing the systems with which you can see the vital signals of your business, and if not in real time, in real enough time, whatever that means in relation to your business and the cycles of your business. I think if your gut instinct is, man, I just got to walk around and see what that Tony Uphoff is doing just to check in with him, then that's a failure of your systems and your process, not a failure of your management, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Tony, I think my sort of comment relating to that coming in as well was, some of the big software companies are creating these tools, from Qualtrics to Workday and others, that these weekly pulses, so that it's not just like the CEO gets it, but other people in the company can see it. How are we doing about? How are we feeling about this?
Really good point.
And really sort of
good point.
Triggering the conversation and giving. In some ways, it doesn't exclude other things, but it gives context to some of those conversations that in some ways take the place of, or the, sort of the proxy for the walking around thing, like, oh, look at this, who would have known? So, but your larger point there about if you do this as if, it's, I don't know what I don't know, and I better go find out what I don't know, rather than saying, I got an idea on some things, let me go help put this in context.
Yeah. Well, I think to your point too, I know one of the journeys we've been on over the last 18 months particularly is, this is going to sound a little hokey, but it's accurate in our case, is democratizing data. And rather than, like a lot of companies that have been around a long time, Thomas had these systems that a ton of, like effort were put in to create these reports that when you looked at it, actually went to a remarkably small number of people. And as you look at the business today, we've taken that and spread that across a much broader group of people. So the data goes down to proximity to where the application of it is going to have the biggest impact. It could be an application of data and information that benefits a customer, that benefits in our case, an advertiser, a supplier, or benefits an employee for that matter. But I think we're getting better and better. And boy, Bob, as you well know, those tools, we use Google Data Studio just to create these dashboards. And I got to tell you, those tools have become so flexible. So, I'm not a developer. I'm a user of these systems, but boy, you don't need a manual. You don't need oh yeah, I can't remember the Excel shortcuts again. How does that work? It opens up, I think, a whole new way of using data to allow people to understand what's going on. So the other one too, and I know you're a fan of the company as well. We're about to bring in Splunk into the company, and what Splunk is going to allow us to do is to look across all of our systems and to see the ebb and flow of the usage of all the systems, so we can optimize the various systems that we've got and get an even better understanding of not just the level of activity, but who's using what, where, and when, so that we can optimize them, so we can make them better for the overall benefit of the company and the employees.
Tony, it's one, I love the idea about, as you mentioned there, the democratizing the data, but it's funny, right? Sometimes that's a wonderful mission, but how then does a company go about to do that? Because if we sort of take our old approaches and, erase the date and, update them by 3 or 5 or 10 years, you can run into trouble. So I won't identify this technology company, but it's one of the biggest technology companies in the world. They wanted to democratize their database. And so they opened it up to, they wanted to open it up to developers online to get more developers in there doing great things, creating tools and solutions and so on like that. So they said they created a little sandbox. They created all these nice terms. You can do this, you can do this, you can do this. And, they kept watching the usage monitors, and it was like 6 people, 2 people, 1 person. They said, what the hell's going on? And so they asked somebody from outside to come in and take a look at it. And but after about a minute, the guy said, well, how much, what's the price, to get in that sandbox and mess around? And somebody said, oh, we cut the price from $200,000 to $30,000. All right.
Oh.
Geez, and you don't have tens of thousands, pouring in here. But they just didn't think of it that way.
Yeah.
They thought that the obstacle to democratization was access, but it isn't. It's all those. It's got to be access. It's got to be the price. It's got to be, is it easy to use? Do you make me sign 500 contracts? Do you go through all these steps? So really interesting, Tony. And I think it is that thing that you talk a lot about. We're getting away some from management and into more leadership. How do you take the concept and kick it open in a leadership way that opens it up to more folks? And Tony, I wanted to be sure to ask you, with the fabulous work that your company, Thomas, does, and also your high growth, high usage platform, Thomas Net, is doing. What are you seeing over, the past few weeks since we've talked about some interesting trends coming up?
Yeah, I'll share with you, Bob, and I think we've touched on this before. We're now in the 4th wave of a monthly survey that we do on top of the data. So we survey, on an average month, we survey 1,000 manufacturing companies about the impact that COVID-19 pandemic is having on their business. And I'll give you some really fascinating trends and some of the things that we're seeing move around in the data. So the first is, very early on when we did the first survey, we saw a surprising level of companies that were likely or extremely likely to reshore their manufacturing back to North America. And I say a surprising number. reshoring has been taking place for the better part of a decade. A lot of people think manufacturing all left the United States. Not only did it not, it's actually been slowly but surely coming back, not quite the same way, but it has been coming back. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated that. So early on, it was about 45 to 50%, I believe, were likely or extremely likely. That's now at 70%.
Oh, wow.
4 months in. So that's a remarkable, focus on reshoring. As you might know, Bob, the U.S. government has replaced their narrative on tariffs and are starting to talk about accelerating reshoring. So they're starting to think about putting stimulus bills, which I think is a very smart step. I think the average person can't really understand a tariff. It's complicated. You don't really understand the mathematical formula. There's nothing hard to understand about reshoring, right? And so I think you're going to see continued acceleration and growth in that, which is quite good for North American manufacturing. The other thing we're seeing is more robust hiring than we would have anticipated. So close to 40% of the companies are actually hiring right now. So you would think this would be this very difficult time, and production is coming back online. And then a corollary data point is, in the manufacturing industry, the biggest barrier over the last 10 years or so has been skilled labor. Manufacturing jobs fell out of favor today. They're not white collar or blue collar, they're new collar jobs. They're high tech manufacturing jobs. They're excellent jobs, great pay, great benefits. But we've kind of convinced a generation or two that manufacturing is not a great career option. So there's this skills gap, if you will. Well, what our data showed is that companies, Bob, that invested in apprenticeships have been able to weather that better than others. Now, it seems painfully obvious, but apprenticeships have been hard to get off the ground in the United States. As you know, they really came from European manufacturing, particularly German manufacturing. And it looks like that's actually starting to have a very positive impact, which is really, really great to see. And then the third piece I would mention is we're seeing a dramatic lift in demand around anything you and I would define as advanced manufacturing, robotics, IIoT, 3D printing. It's clear that very similar to the way we were talking about how a company like mine would run, and we're increasingly leaning on technology to provide scale and access and flexibility, manufacturers are doing the same thing. And we think, Bob, that combination of reshoring, perhaps a little window of opportunity around skills shortage, and an increase in investment in automation technology, we really believe this is going to reshape global manufacturing for decades to come. And not just in the areas that we would think of as like personal protection equipment. We think that's going to really reshape the landscape. On the day-to-day data that we track, every second somebody's sourcing a product or evaluating a supplier on ThomasNet, we've seen, interesting, in May, we saw a slowdown of PPE sourcing. And okay, it looks like we're kind of through the worst part of this. Guess what? That's now lifted back up. We are seeing some subtle differences, which is interesting. And I can theorize why this is happening, but I'm not positive I completely understand it. Masks, traditional masks that many of us are wearing, right? That has been consistently high. In May, it slowed down. It stayed kind of about May levels into June. What spiked dramatically was shielding equipment. So what we assume part of this is as companies, particularly in the Northeast, are starting to open back up, particularly consumer-facing companies. If you've been in to get a haircut or something, right? They've got this plastic shielding. So we think that's why sanitization materials and equipment just off the charts. So that continues to be very, very, very high. But we think in terms of sourcing, and then there's 72,000 categories we track, so there's all kinds of other trends there. But I don't think that we're going to move away from PPE sourcing anytime soon. I think it's going to be with us, obviously, until we see a scalable vaccine solution. I think it's too risky for companies, schools, public facilities, that kind of thing. I think you're going to see, that continue for an extended period.
Tony, fascinating there, the range and extent of the insights that, with ThomasNet that you're able to pull together. And hey, I'm going to go on mute here for a second, but any chance you could use some of your sourcing contacts? I could use a case of Purell.
I got you covered.
Okay.
I got you covered. Do you want your own logo on that? Do you want a Cloud Wars Live logo on them?
I don't want to get showy about it. It's
got it.
But maybe we'll talk. We'll talk.
I know a guy.
Okay. Well, Tony, as always, fascinating. Did you have any final thought? Anything you wanted to wrap with?
I think, I guess I go back to kind of where we started, Bob, a little bit. And, you and I share a common trait that we're optimists by nature. We're people that look forward and don't spend a lot of time looking backwards. And I don't mean to look at the world through rose-colored glasses and, oh my gosh, look at all these opportunities that are being created. This is without question a moment of opportunity. And I just encourage other leaders, share your ideas, share your thoughts on this. I think if people can calm their fears and anxiety, focus on, there are tremendous market opportunities to be had right now. And I think clever use of a very accessible technologies today. And by accessible, I mean affordable too. Yeah. And I think it is just, I think, a remarkable time that companies that can be agile and can be innovative right now are really going to find a disproportionate win on the backside of this horrible pandemic that we're wrestling with. And so I just, I encourage myself, I encourage our company, I encourage others around me. Don't get locked into this idea that it's like our office space, conversation. Don't get locked into this idea that you're limited right now, because you really aren't. Now, yes, there's some tough things for companies to work through, but boy, this is a really great time to connect with new users, connect with new customers, listen to employees, try new ideas and things, because I think you may find a year or two from now, it's less of an arena for creativity and innovation if work kind of gets back to the basics. So I guess a long way of saying, Bob, don't waste these opportunities. And again, I don't mean to make light of some of the challenges that we're all working through, but I think there's also, on the flip side of this, some just remarkable opportunities.
It is, Tony. And in an episode we did yesterday with Charlie Araujo, one of the things that I mentioned there, I think it's some of this new phase of leadership and some new things, whether you're a CEO or, other leaders in companies or an entrepreneur working on your own. But these choices we make, right? We can choose to feel trapped. We can choose to feel paralyzed. We can choose, these various other things, or you can choose to be, optimistic and opportunistic and get out there. I think, as you said, because I think people are looking for that. They're eager to see inspiration, open-mindedness, this thing of new ideas. So many companies over the last 10 years have said, yes, we accept failure. Fast failure is good. We learn from lessons. Yeah, well, point to some of the examples. Well, they're not.
Introduce me to the guy that failed, would you? Yeah.
So, but Tony, no, those are wonderful concluding thoughts on it. I think this is great. I hope that between now and the next time we get together, you get a chance to have some fun and enjoy the summer, as well as doing great things with Thomas. And thanks as always for sharing some of your great ideas with us here at Cloud Wars Live. Thanks,
Bill. Good to see you, Bob.
Tony, thanks a million. And folks, especially to all of you, thank you so much for being with us. It's always a pleasure. We hope that you're doing well. I hope there's some fun to be had in the summer for all of you. And we look forward very much to seeing you next time here at Cloud Wars Live.